My name is Kira Ward. I'm 28. And last Saturday, I watched my entire family toast to stealing my future. I had just told them I'd closed on my first house. My father stood up, raised his glass, and laughed in front of 16 relatives. Kira, this house isn't yours. Nothing you buy will ever be yours. You're just a walking paycheck for this family. My mother clapped. My sister smirked and said, "Finally, we get something nice." They all laughed. I sat there, hands shaking under the table, and said nothing, because I had been waiting for that exact moment for years. Welcome back to Revenger Episodes, where hidden truths finally come to light. If your own family has ever financially abused you, this one will hit hard. Drop a comment. What's the most painful thing your family ever took from you? I read every single one. Subscribe so you never miss a story. It started when I was 13. Summer 2011. I'd babysat twins for 2 months and earned my first paycheck, $186. My father drove me to Bank of America, sat me in a leather chair, and opened a minor savings account in my name. He'd be co-owner, he said, to protect me. He used that word twice. I signed. I was 13. I'd never signed anything in my life. When the blue debit card arrived with my name embossed on it, I felt pure pride. I put it in a wooden box on my desk. It would be 6 years before I learned what cosigner actually meant. By 16, my mother had invented a system called household contributions. I paid $40 for groceries and $30 for utilities every month. My sister Brooke, 2 years younger, paid nothing. When I asked why, my mother smiled her sales commission smile and said, "Honey, family helps family. Brooke isn't strong like you. The day you stop being able to help is the day you stop being family." I wrote that down in a notebook that night. Because at 16, I already knew it was a sentence that would matter later. My mother kept her own notebook, floral cover, pressed carnations, in the kitchen island drawer. She logged every dollar I gave her. Dated. Initialed. There was no column for Brooke. There never was. Years later, I would find that notebook in their attic, sitting beside a sealed envelope I was never meant to see. But that comes later. I got a full scholarship to Northeastern in 2014, majored in civil and structural engineering. I worked co-ops every summer and still wired $200 a month home because the heating bill went up. I sent it without question. I had been trained to. When I graduated in 2018 with a $74,000 job offer from a Portland engineering firm, I called my mother first. She said, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Now we can finally breathe." 2 weeks later, my father called and told me to start wiring $800 a month into the joint account. Not asked. Told. I printed my welcome email from HR and taped it to the fridge. My name. My accomplishment. Real. 2 weekends later it was gone. Flipped over, used as scrap paper for my sister's grocery list. The night I truly understood what was happening, I was 19, standing at an ATM at 11 p.m. I needed $40 for textbooks. 3 days earlier, I had deposited $1,300 from my co-op stipend. The screen blinked. Balance. $84. I called my father from the car. He didn't apologize. He said, "I had to move some things around, kid. Don't make a scene over a few hundred." I sat in the dark with the engine off and watched my breath fog the windshield. That was the moment I understood. Cosigner wasn't a word. It was a permission slip. Here's what you need to know about Brooke. She was born in January 2000, 4 weeks early. 18 days in the NICU. My mother's postpartum depression was so severe my father moved her bed into the nursery for 6 months. I was 2 years old. They couldn't raise both of us, so I was sent to live with my grandparents in Yarmouth for 18 months. My grandfather Hartwell ran a small shipyard on Casco Bay called Ward and Son Shipworks. I don't remember living there. But my Uncle Teddy kept a single Polaroid in his wallet for 26 years, me at age 2, sitting on my grandfather's knee inside the shipworks office, a curved piece of oak in my small hands. My grandfather wearing the look of a man who has just made a decision. I didn't understand that look until much later. Growing up, Brooke was the family's fragile miracle. My father explained it to me when I was 11, hand on my head, patient voice. Your sister was born early. You were born easy. That's just how God evened things out. I believed him. For a long time, I believed him. By 16, we lived in two completely different childhoods. I worked 12 hours a week at Hannaford for spending money. Brooke got a brand new Mazda CX-5 because, as my mother explained over breakfast, she gets anxious on the bus. At 18, I earned a full scholarship. Brooke was handed a future. I had to build mine while funding theirs. And they laughed at that dinner table like it was already over. They had no idea what was coming. While I was working 16-hour shifts on bridge inspections, my sister was getting a harbor view loft. At 18, Brooke got a fully paid college tuition. She dropped out after 3 semesters because the curriculum didn't align with her vision. At 23, my parents covered her deposit on a loft in the Old Port, Harbor View, Cobblestone Street, the whole picture. I was 25, sending $1,200 a month home, living in a 1-bedroom studio with a single window. Then one afternoon in 2023, I came home to drop off paperwork and saw my mother's visa statement on the coffee table. I should not have read it. I read it anyway. Old Port Wine Bar, $187. Sephora, $312. Vineyard Vines, $441. Uber to Boston, $94. Next to each charge, in my mother's tight cursive, the allowance. My mother kept 2 household budgets. Only one of them had my name on it. By 2023, Brooke had been to rehab 3 times. Opioids. Pills ordered online. Then a crash on Route 1 outside Brunswick. Her Mazda into a guardrail. I wired $4,500 for the first rehab, $3,800 for the second. By the third, I had stopped asking what the money was for. Then came Black Friday weekend. 1:14 a.m. I was asleep before a 16-hour bridge inspection the next morning. My phone lit up. Brooke. Need $4,500 by Monday. Tanner's dad is suing me. Mom said you'd help. Don't make this hard. I opened my banking app in the dark and wired it. 18 minutes later, a second message. Also rent. $1,200. Mom said since you missed Christmas, I wired it too. I lay back down. I didn't sleep. The next morning I missed a deadline on structural drawings I'd spent 6 weeks on. My manager pulled me into a glass-walled office and asked carefully if everything was okay at home. I said yes. I said it was a one-time thing. My sister sent a thumbs-up emoji. You might be wondering why I didn't just stop. I asked myself that for years. The answer hung in my parents' living room, a photograph in a heavy gold frame. My mother holding Brooke in the NICU. Tubes, monitors, my father's hand on the incubator glass. Beside it, a blank space on the wall where my college graduation portrait should have been. They had retold the story of that photograph at every holiday dinner for 25 years. My father had turned down a promotion to be present for Brooke's recovery. They had sacrificed everything. For most of my life, I believed love and debt were the same word. I believed being a good daughter meant accepting the bill. I did not yet know that the photograph above the empty space on the wall was the most expensive piece of furniture in that house. It would take one sentence from my father, in front of 16 people, to finally break that belief. The first time I saw the house was an accident. It was October 2024, 3 weeks after Brooke's paternity scandal had landed on a regional gossip site, and my father had asked me to wire $9,800 for her legal fees. I wired it. I don't remember the drive afterward. Somehow I ended up in Cape Elizabeth at 5 a.m., parked on Harbor Light Lane with a cold cup of coffee, watching the Atlantic crash against the lighthouse rocks. For 32 minutes, I was no one's daughter. Walking back to my car, I saw a handwritten sign taped to a telephone pole. 14 Harbor Light Lane, for sale by owner. Behind it, a small Cape Cod. Peeling cedar shingles. Stone chimney. Gravel pull-off. No driveway. I took a photo and drove home. I didn't know I had just photographed my future. That November, I opened a savings account at Camden National Bank. I told no one. I put no one's name on it but mine. I set up an automatic transfer of 35% of every paycheck and kept sending the $1,200 a month into my parents' joint account, so nothing looked different from the outside. For 14 months, I lived two lives. The visible one funded their retirement. The hidden one built me a door. By January 2026, the account held $84,000. The Cape on Harbor Light Lane was still listed, now with a realtor named Diane Pendleton, asking $480,000. I called her. I went the next morning. My pre-approval letter arrived at 11 p.m. in a Hannaford parking lot after a late shift, engine running, heat on full. Pre-approved up to $410,000. Congratulations, Ms. Ward. I read it 3 times. Folded it into quarters. Put it in the glove box. Told no one for 11 days. I offered $475,000. Accepted within 36 hours. At the end of the showing, Diane pressed a small piece of brass into my hand, a sample key. Not the real one, she said. That comes at closing. But hold this. It helps. I kept that key in my coat pocket for 3 months. It was the first thing in my adult life that nobody else had a claim to. Then my mother found out. February. 9:14 p.m. Her voice had that tightness I'd known since childhood. Why am I hearing from Cindy Whitaker that my own daughter is buying a house? My father called 20 minutes later, voice deliberately softer. Sweetheart, we just need to talk about how this fits into the family plan. He left 4 voicemails that night. I listened to 2. By the 4th, 10:48 p.m., I had already poured a glass of water and gone to bed. I had bought a door that locked. They were already planning who else would have a key. And then came the dinner. The toast. The laughter. And the moment I had been quietly preparing for years. That's next episode. If you've ever opened a pre-approval letter alone in a parking lot, you already know what that envelope weighs. Drop a comment. What's the first thing you'd put on the wall of a house your family can never touch? I want to know what freedom looks like in your handwriting. By the time my father stood up at that dinner table, my uncle had already been counting the days. Let me tell you about Teddy. He's 65. My father's older brother. For most of my life, he was just the quiet uncle who showed up at Thanksgiving with a cheap bottle of wine and sat at the far end of the table. He never remarried after his wife Helen died of an aneurysm in 2009. He retired in 2022 after 30 years as a trust officer at First Coastal Bank of Maine. That last detail mattered more than any of us knew. The first sign came at Thanksgiving 2025. My mother was announcing that Brooke had been gifted a Peloton. My father made his usual small talk. Teddy sat quietly, then looked at me for a long moment and said, "Some things take a long time to build, Kira. Don't let anyone hurry you." My mother glanced at him. My father gave the short laugh he uses when something has unsettled him. The conversation moved on. I didn't understand that sentence until April. The second sign came in early March. Teddy called my office at 7:43 a.m. 4 minutes, 18 seconds. 3 questions. My closing date, my lender's name, my realtor's name. No explanation. At the end he said, "Don't tell your father I called." Not yet. I could hear a fishing boat's air horn somewhere behind him, low and patient, Yarmouth Harbor on a clear morning. I stood in my office with my hand on the doorframe and a feeling I didn't yet have a name for. On March 15th, my 28th birthday, Teddy drove to Portland and waited for me in my building lobby. He had a leather briefcase I had never seen before. We went to a small conference room. He closed the door, sat across from me, and for a long time said nothing. When he finally spoke, he was crying. The only time in my life I had ever seen it. He told me, in the careful sentences of a man who had rehearsed the speech for 20 years, my grandfather had not died poor. In 2005, after a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis, my grandfather Hartwell had sold Ward and Son Shipworks for $382,000. He did not leave that money to my father. Instead, on April 7, 2006, 12 days before he died, my grandfather established an irrevocable trust. He named it the May Eleanor Ward Trust, after my grandmother, who had died of ovarian cancer in 1972 at age 28. He chose 28 as the trigger age because that was the age my grandmother had never been allowed to reach. Teddy was the trustee. Over 20 years, the trust had grown to just over $1,550,000. On April 12, 6 days away, It would wire $260,000 into the escrow account for 14 Harbor Light Lane. The remainder held until I turned 30, then 35, then mine entirely. I didn't speak for a long time. I'm a structural engineer. I've been trained to find the load-bearing element in any system. I looked at my uncle and asked the only question that mattered. Why are you telling me now? Why not at 25? He didn't look away. I owe you an apology, Kira. You were in a bad year. Brooke was overdosing. I was a coward. I was wrong to wait. He slid a navy blue folder across the table, First Coastal Bank seal embossed on the corner. The trust document. 20 years of quarterly statements. And a letter my grandfather had written me when I was 8 years old. I'm giving this to you now, Teddy said, because next month your father will try to take from you the one thing he never knew you had. I opened the folder. Read the first page. Closed it. Went home. Sat on my apartment floor. Read my grandfather's letter. And for the first time since that night at the ATM in Falmouth Plaza, I let myself cry. I closed on the house April 12th. On April 13th, I drove to my parents' house. I sat at the same kitchen table where my mother once logged every dollar I owed her and told them I had bought a house in Cape Elizabeth. I said nothing about the trust. Nothing about Teddy. Only the public version. Pre-approval, down payment, mortgage. My mother set down her coffee. My father didn't move. Then she smiled. The same smile she had the day she explained cosigners. That's wonderful, sweetheart. We have so much to talk about. My father said nothing. He was already calculating. The next morning at 6:52 a.m., an email landed from my father. Subject line, family dinner. Important matters. 3 lines. Saturday, April 18th, 6 p.m. Our house. Be on time. No exclamation marks. No emoji. The format my father reserves for occasions when he intends to deliver a verdict. My mother texted separately, "Wear something nice. We're celebrating your news, sweetheart." I called Teddy that afternoon. He listened without interrupting, then said only one thing. "Bring the deed. And eat before you come." He was telling me to come armed. He was also telling me to come fed. I arrived Saturday at 6:02 p.m. 6 cars in the driveway. 4 more on the street. I parked behind a black Audi I didn't recognize and sat with the engine off, counting. I had been to enough family dinners to know this house's capacity. Tonight it was full. 16 people inside, not counting me. My father at the head of the table in his blazer and reading glasses. My mother decanting a wine I had bought them for Christmas. Brooke on the couch, phone in her lap. Her boyfriend Tanner in a polo shirt that didn't fit. My Aunt Eleanor watching the room with the eyes of a woman who hadn't been told why she was there. My mother's parents on the love seat, both in their late 70s. Cousins, aunts, uncles filling every chair. Teddy in the corner. Brown blazer. The same one he wore to every funeral of the last 15 years. And at the far end of the dining room, Pastor Roland Pettigrew. 30 years at First Methodist in Falmouth. My father had called a pastor to this dinner. I set my bag down. Inside it, the deed to 14 Harbor Light Lane. My grandfather had built me a door with a lock they didn't know existed. And I was about to open it. Next episode, the toast, the laughter, and the moment everything changed. My mother only uses the Lenox holiday china twice a year. She used it when Brooke came home from her second rehab. She used it when she cut off her own sister for 18 months over an inheritance dispute. Both times, someone left in tears. Tonight she had set it for me. She slid past me in the hallway and touched my elbow. "Smile, Kira. They all came for you." I smiled. I was not smiling for her. The salad course came and went. Then my father stood up. He tapped his ring against the wine glass, the riedel I had bought my mother for her 60th birthday. The table quieted. He thanked everyone. Congratulated me warmly for closing on a beautiful home in Cape Elizabeth. A small round of applause. My grandmother Florence beamed at me with the open, uncomplicated love she had always given me. Then my father shifted into the second half of his speech. "Rosemary and I have been thinking about retirement for a long time. We are so blessed that Kira chose to honor us this way. This house in Cape Elizabeth will be the family's retirement home. Rosemary and I will move in this summer. Brooke and Tanner will have a guest suite when they visit. The table applauded. Florence clapped the loudest. My Aunt Eleanor set her wine glass down very slowly and did not pick it up again. Pastor Pettigrew kept his hands folded, and I noticed for the first time he had brought a small black notebook to a dinner party. Then Brooke looked up from her phone, smirked, and said into the lull, loud enough for everyone. Finally, we get something nice. I set my fork down. I did not raise my voice. I don't remember agreeing to any of this. My mother laughed brightly. Of course you did, honey. We talked about it. We did not. My father stepped behind my chair and placed his right hand on my left shoulder. His thumb pressed into the bone, exactly the way it had when I was 14, and he wanted me to listen. He lowered his voice to the patient, paternal tone that was his most weaponized. Kira, sweetheart, let me make this very simple. After everything we have given you, your education, your start, your life, you will never own anything we can't take. Not really. This house is the family's house. That is the order of things. He laughed at his own words. Most of the table laughed with him. My mother clapped. Brooke raised her glass. I did not flinch. I looked across the table at my uncle. He gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen. The room did not yet know what was about to happen. My uncle pushed his chair back from the table, maybe 3 inches. The wood scraped the hardwood floor. A small sound, almost polite. But in that room full of laughter, it landed like a struck bell. The table quieted. Not all at once. In layers. My uncle did not raise his voice. He said only, Curtis, sit down. My father blinked. He looked at my uncle the way he had looked at him for 60 years, as an older brother who had stayed in their father's shadow, who had never amounted to much. My Aunt Eleanor was the first person to sit. She sat the way a woman sits in church when she has just understood something difficult. Watching her, my father sat as well, slowly, back into the chair he had stood up from. My uncle reached down beside his chair and lifted a leather briefcase onto the table. He set it beside the pumpkin pie my mother had not yet cut, opened it, removed a single folder. Navy blue. First Coastal Bank of Maine Trust Services Division seal embossed in the corner. On top of the papers inside, a cream-colored envelope. Sealed with red wax, pressed with the imprint of a 5-pointed sea star. The old logo of First Coastal Bank before the 2011 rebrand. The same envelope. The same seal. The one my uncle had pressed into my 8-year-old hand at my grandfather's funeral, before my mother had taken it from me and made it disappear. My mother saw the seal first. Her face changed in a way I had only seen twice in my life. The wine in her hand tilted. She set it on the linen tablecloth without looking. My uncle broke the seal. The old wax cracked clean, the way it cracks when it has been kept warm and dry for 20 years. He removed 2 pages of slightly yellowed paper, laid them gently in the center of the table beside the uncut pie. Curtis, Rosemary, he said. You may want to read the first line yourselves. Out loud. It will save me the trouble. My father reached for that letter the way a man reaches for a court summons he's been expecting for 2 decades. He put on his reading glasses with both hands. Cleared his throat. Pursuant to the irrevocable directive of the grantor, Hartwell J. Ward, dated April 3, 2006. This trust is hereby established for the sole benefit of Kira Marie Ward, granddaughter of the grantor. He stopped. The room stopped. My mother gripped the edge of the table, so hard her knuckles went white. Florence whispered something to Dale. Pastor Pettigrew bowed his head but did not close his eyes. Brooke put her phone down for the first time in 40 minutes. Patricia stood up halfway, then sat back down. The room had the texture of a courtroom in the seconds after a verdict is read, but before anyone has understood what it means. My uncle gently reached across and took the letter from my father's hands. Allow me, he said. He read the rest in the unhurried voice of a man who had read this paragraph to himself, privately, once a year, for 20 years. The trustee, Theodore A. Ward, shall hold and manage the principal sum of $382,000 and any growth thereof until the beneficiary attains the age of 28 years, at which time the trustee shall be authorized to distribute up to $300,000 toward the acquisition of residential real property in the state of Maine, in the beneficiary's sole name. The remainder shall be distributed in 2 equal installments at ages 30 and 35. As of April 12, 2026, said acquisition has been completed. The property is located at 14 Harbor Light Lane, Cape Elizabeth, Maine. Title is held in the name of Kira Marie Ward. Sole owner. Free and clear of any claim by Curtis or Rosemary Ward. The table did not move. My father did not speak. My grandfather, a man who died 12 days after signing that document, had looked at his 2-year-old granddaughter sitting on his knee in a shipyard office, holding a curved piece of oak in her small hands, and had decided something. 20 years later, his decision was sitting at their dinner table, and it had just been read aloud. My uncle laid the paper down, folded his hands, and the room held its breath. Brooke dropped her water glass. It didn't break. The water spread across my mother's freshly ironed damask tablecloth, crossed my father's bread plate, and soaked into the lap of his pressed trousers. He did not move to brush it away. He sat perfectly still, the way I had once seen him sit at his own father's funeral, when he understood, possibly for the first time, that he had not been loved the way he had told himself he had been. Florence began to cry quietly. She didn't look at me. She looked at my mother. The expression on her face was not anger. It was shame. The shame of a woman who had raised the daughter who had done this. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's own sister, stood up from her chair, crossed the dining room without a word, and stood behind my chair beside Teddy. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. My grandfather had bought me a house in cash before I had learned to spell my own last name. He had named me by full legal name in a document written in his own dying hand. He had chosen the trigger age, 28, because it was the age my grandmother had not lived to see. He had used 3 generations of shipbuilding on Casco Bay to give me a door that locked behind me and stayed locked. He had trusted the truth to the only man in the family who deserved it. And my father, who 10 minutes earlier had announced he would be retiring into my house, had just been read aloud, in front of 16 people, as a man with no legal claim to the address he had been planning to occupy. He looked at me. For the first time in 28 years, my father had nothing to say. But my uncle wasn't finished. The folder was still open. He hadn't touched the stack of papers underneath the letter yet. He passed one sheet to my Aunt Eleanor, another to Pastor Pettigrew. Then, in the calm tone of a man who had read trust documents aloud for a living, he explained that my grandfather had specifically chosen not to leave his money to my father, and that the reason was written in my grandfather's own handwriting, attached to the trust. He read the relevant paragraph. My son Curtis has demonstrated repeatedly, over the course of 40 years, an inability to distinguish his own pocket from those around him. In 1989, he refused the shipyard. A man may choose his own work. But a man who refuses the work and still believes he is owed the inheritance has not understood the difference between a son and a creditor. I will not subsidize that confusion. The room had no answer to that paragraph. My grandfather's handwriting had been shaky in his final weeks. The cancer had taken his hands. But he had written my name, Kira Marie Ward, slowly and carefully, in a hand that did not waver. I could see it when Teddy passed me the document. Then came the 80 quarterly statements. 20 years. Paper-clipped in stacks of 20, numbered by hand in the upper right corner of every page. My uncle explained the math in 2 sentences. $382,000 at inception. $1,550,000 at the close of the most recent quarter. $260,000 wired into Camden National Escrow on April 11th. The remainder held for me until I turned 30. The mortgage on her loan documents, $120,000 at 6.85%, is a separate obligation she chose to take on herself to build her own credit history. The deed at the Cumberland County Registry will confirm. Kira Marie Ward is the sole owner of 14 Harbor Light Lane. There is no second name on that title. There never will be. I looked at my sister. Brooke hadn't moved since she dropped the glass. Phone face down on the table. Mouth slightly open. She was looking at my parents in a way I had never seen her look at them before. She was doing 30 seconds of math she had never done in her life. She stood up. Wait, the car, the loft, She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I had practiced what I said next alone in my apartment 3 times. I said it in the same voice I had used to wire her $4,500 at 1:14 a.m. on Black Friday. You were never living off Mom and Dad's money, Brooke. You were living off mine. She sat back down so hard the Windsor chair groaned. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. I watched my sister understand in real time that she had been raised on her sister's life. My father found his voice. Teddy, stop. This is a misunderstanding. We sacrificed for both these girls. Dad would have wanted. My uncle interrupted him without raising his voice. Curtis, Dad named you specifically in the document. Would you like me to read it again? My father did not answer. My mother stood up. She looked around the table, at Florence, at Patricia, at Eleanor, and opened her mouth to begin a defense. Pastor Pettigrew rose to his feet. I had known him since childhood. He had married 3 of my cousins, buried my grandmother, baptized my sister. A careful, soft-spoken man who almost never intervened in family matters outside church walls. His black notebook was open on the table in front of him. He looked at my mother. Rosemary, I think you should sit down. She didn't move. He didn't repeat himself. He simply held her gaze, the same way he had held my grandfather's gaze on the last evening of his life in a hospice bed in Yarmouth, while my grandfather told him exactly what kind of son Curtis had been and what would be required to protect his granddaughter. My mother sat down. The pastor my parents had been certain belonged to them had been keeping notes on this family for 30 years. He had simply chosen which side of the table to take them from. Then my father reached for his second tool. When pressure fails, he pleads. I had watched him make this switch my entire life. Kira, sweetheart, we are still your parents. This doesn't have to change anything. We can sit down, just the family, and figure out a path forward. He paused. He waited for me to fill the silence. I had filled it my whole life. I did not fill it now. You can't just cut us off. Family doesn't do that. After everything I set down my napkin. I did not crumple it. I folded it once, clean in half, the way I would later learn. My grandfather had been taught in 1954 to fold his marine architecture application. I had never been shown that fold. I simply did it. I stood up. I looked at my grandmother Florence, who had loved me without complication for 28 years and was now sitting with a hand over her mouth. I looked at my Aunt Eleanor, who hadn't spoken in 3 hours but whose eyes had never left my father's face. I looked at Madison, who had texted me at 6:14 a.m. the morning after the Black Friday transfer to ask if I was okay, the only person in this family who ever had. I looked at Pastor Pettigrew, who nodded once. I looked at Teddy. Then I looked at my father. For 28 years, I thought family helping family meant I helped and you collected. I was wrong about that. Helping is something both people choose. What you did has another name. I picked up my bag. I walked out. Behind me, the house was completely silent. That was 3 weeks ago. I am writing this from the kitchen table of 14 Harbor Light Lane. The Atlantic is visible from the window above the sink. The lighthouse blinks every 3 seconds. My grandfather's letter is framed on the wall above the door, the first thing anyone sees when they walk in. Nobody else has a key. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs it. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you own that nobody can take from you? I read every single one. I finished my speech. Then I said the last thing. I am not your retirement plan. I am not your safety net. I am not the daughter who keeps showing up after she has been taught that showing up is theft. Tomorrow, my attorney closes the joint account at Bank of America. Next week, she delivers a cease and desist to both of you regarding 14 Harbor Light Lane. After that, I do not know when or if I will see you again. That is the truth. The truth is not cruel. The cruelty has always been yours. I did not look at my mother. She had not earned that. I walked toward the door. My uncle stood. My Aunt Eleanor stood slowly, and as I passed her, she touched the back of my hand with 2 fingers. A gesture I had never received from her in my life. Madison rose and followed me. Behind me, Pastor Pettigrew addressed the room one last time. I think, he said very gently, we are done here. Brooke did not move, did not speak, did not cry. She watched me leave. I opened the front door. The April air off Casco Bay came into the house. Cold. Salt. Clean. And from somewhere out past Falmouth Fourside, I heard it, the low, patient horn of a fishing boat. The same sound I had heard through my uncle's phone 6 weeks earlier, the morning he called me at 7:43 a.m. and told me not to tell my father yet. My uncle and I walked out of that house at exactly the same speed. We stopped on the porch. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and removed a second cream envelope, sealed with the same red wax, undisturbed. "This one was always meant for you," he said. "I kept a duplicate. The original is still in your mother's attic. Unopened." I opened it in the porch light while my father's house behind me slowly emptied. The letter was one page. My grandfather's handwriting. The same Parker fountain pen. "Dear granddaughter, if you are reading this, I am gone. The trust has done its job and your father has done what I prayed he would not. I am writing to you when you are 8 years old, on the night before I sign the papers that will protect you from him. You are asleep upstairs. I have not been allowed to see you for 4 months. I am not angry about that anymore. I am only sorry. Your grandmother May was 28 years old when she died. She had a small notebook in her bedside drawer, what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. A garden. A small bookstore. To watch her son raise a daughter who looked like her. She was not allowed any of it. I have spent 54 years trying to understand why God gave me her time and not her. I did not leave the shipyard to your father, because he has spent 40 years confusing love with debt. I will not feed that confusion. I am leaving it to you instead at 28, because that is the age your grandmother was not permitted to see. You will see it for her. Buy a house. Lock the door. Be kind to your Uncle Teddy. He is a better man than he believes he is. Forgive Brooke when she is ready. Forgive your parents only on terms you can live with. And remember, when they tell you the house is not yours, that you were loved into it before you knew the word for love. Your grandfather heart." I read it twice. I did not cry while I read it. I was not ready yet. I folded it once, the same fold as the napkin, and put it in the inside pocket of my coat. The next morning, I met my attorney Nora Howerin on Free Street in Portland. We closed the Joint Bank of America account that afternoon. The teller handed me back the canceled debit card, the same account my father had opened when I was 13, the same account he had used as a permission slip for 15 years, with the slight bow people give to documents they understand are important. Nora drafted the cease and desist the same afternoon. 3 letters. 3 names. 3 FedEx envelopes, signature required. Once delivered, she said, they have no civil basis to approach the property. If they do, it becomes a different conversation. My family's last legal claim on me was a signature on a delivery slip. Brooke called 3 days after the letters arrived. 11 minutes. She did not ask for money. She asked me one question, in the same voice I had used to ask Teddy a question 6 weeks earlier in my conference room. "Did you know before that night?" I told her the truth. 5 weeks. None of us knew before that. She was quiet a long time. In the background I could hear a washing machine running. The first time I could ever remember hearing my sister do her own laundry. At the end of the call, she said, "I think I need to figure out who I am without their math." She didn't say sorry. I didn't ask her to. I didn't invite her in yet. But I didn't close the door. My father sent a handwritten letter 4 days later. 2 pages. Heavy stationery. No apology. Only explanation. You have to understand the circumstances. Your grandfather always favored you. We were trying to keep the family together. I read it once. I put it in the navy blue folder beside the trust document, the codicil, and my grandfather's letter. 3 letters. 3 men in one family. 1 daughter. The folder keeps the math honest. On April 28th, I drove to my parents' house with Madison and a banker's box. They weren't home. Nora had timed it precisely. I let myself in with the spare key I had not yet returned. Climbed to the attic. Found, in a box marked holiday decorations in my mother's handwriting, the original cream envelope my uncle had pressed into my 8-year-old hand at my grandfather's funeral. The wax seal was unbroken. My mother had not dared to open it in 20 years. I did not open it either. I carried it down the stairs, out the front door, and into my car. On April 30th, I slept at 14 Harbor Light Lane for the first time. I woke at 5:48 a.m. Made coffee in a green ceramic mug from a pottery in the old port, hairline crack near the base that didn't leak. Walked out onto the porch. The lighthouse blinked every 3 seconds. Exactly as it had the first morning I ever came to Cape Elizabeth. The April fog was lifting off the lawn. Inside, above the stone fireplace, I hung my grandfather's letter. Framed in oak, my uncle had milled himself from a piece of the old shipyard. Beside it, the Polaroid. Me at 2 years old, sitting on my grandfather's knee, a curved piece of oak in my small hands. His face wearing the look of a man who has decided something. On the mantel between them, still sealed, the original cream envelope from 2006. My father told me in front of 16 people that I would never own anything they couldn't take. He was right about exactly one thing. They couldn't take it. Because the only things worth owning are the things you were loved into, not the things you were guilt into. My grandfather did not leave me a house. He left me a door. The locks are mine. The math underneath it is honest. And the people who come through it will come because I opened it, not because they inherited a key. My name is Kira Ward. I am 28 years old. And for the first time in my life, the address on my driver's license belongs to a woman who is nobody's debt. If this story found someone you love, someone who has spent their whole life being the responsible one, share it with them quietly. You don't have to say anything. Just send it. Sometimes the boundary another person needs to see is when they first watch a stranger set. Subscribe. There are more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what does freedom feel like the first morning you wake up in a place that is entirely yours?